Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz has called on the Iranian regime to end its attacks on Israel and on the US in the Middle East and says Tehran's nuclear activities must be halted.
We share the interest of the United States and Israel in seeing an end to this regime's terrorism and its dangerous nuclear and missile programs. The military strikes are intended to put an end to the destructive game being played by a weakened regime. This is not without risk. We do not know how far the region will be dragged into escalation by Iran's harsh counterstrikes. We take the concerns of our partners in Iran's immediate neighborhood, in the Gulf and in Europe very seriously. We therefore call on Tehran to immediately end these indiscriminate attacks.
And DW's chief international editor, Michaela Küfner, joins us now for more. Now, some observers have labeled the attacks carried out by the US and Israel as a breach of international law. Where does Germany's government stand on that matter?
Well, Friedrich Merz also said in that statement, and he was specifically asked about it, that he would not lecture his partners, meaning, of course, the United States and Israel, on the very question of international law. Without doubt, this is not in accordance with international law. Any international lawyer will tell you that. A lot of them would have been very upset by what they see, that the United States, who in the past was a guarantor of the international world order, would now launch such an attack without a UN Security Council resolution. We all remember the debates over the former Yugoslavia when Serbia was bombarded, whether that was in accordance with a UN resolution or not. Well, here we're now seeing the shortcuts. Nobody's trying to convince any United Nations Security Council anymore. The US and Israel acted unilaterally. You can argue legal concepts, but there is no precedent for this. This will not be seen in accordance with international law by any stretch. But as realpolitik in action, we're watching the international order changed, and we're watching the United States, who in the past guaranteed international law, no longer even refer to it to argue what they're doing.
Now, give us some context here. What are Germany's and Europe's interests in the region? What's at stake for them?
Well, clearly there's no interest in escalation. That's the big fear here. And I think that's also why we heard this very mild criticism from the German Chancellor, speaking of this not being without risk. The risk in the region is apparent. The risk here in Europe is that this conflict will be taken onto the streets of European nations, who are already in parts divided over domestic internal issues. But of course, there's also the war in Ukraine. So this will put further stress potentially on societies here. And one first concrete step that the German government has taken is to up security measures for particularly Jewish and Israeli institutions here in Germany, because there is a growing fear that there might be retaliatory action by Iran-sponsored actors, not necessarily by Iran itself.
Now, talking about concrete steps, do you see any indication that Germany or any other European power might join the war effort against Iran?
No, because that would only complicate what the Israelis and the Americans are doing here. Clearly, they liaised very closely. Germany would not be able to take part because of its own constitution. It would really struggle to get any such a move through the German parliament. And also the Europeans are very much tied up with Ukraine. And here also, interestingly, we heard the German Chancellor speak of a burden sharing. Essentially, there's a recognition that the Europeans are on their own with Ukraine now. The US have dropped by 99% their support, and they're clearly now tied up somewhere else with the very open question on where this all will lead.
Thank you very much. DW's chief international editor, Michaela Küfner.